Well, let me ask you a question. Do you hear my Southern accent?
I do. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I grew up in Tennessee. I tried really hard to move forward with my speech, but it was hard. Every time I asked a question in college, everybody would start laughing.
Really?
I thought I was a natural born comedian. Yeah. So, well, I started uh, at Indiana University was where I did my bachelor's degree. But prior to that, as an elementary school student, I was a complete unmitigated disaster. I hated school. I learned nothing. By the time and one day in the sixth grade, Mr. Robinson showed up in the classroom with all these band instruments, and I just about flipped out. I said, "Oh my gosh! Now school can be fun." And then my mother found out about it and said my grades were so bad that I couldn't take band. So the next year, I was in Mrs. Vandiver's class, and she had no discipline at all. You can just get up and walk around and go outside, whatever you wanted to do. So I saw these band kids every day. They'd get up and go get on a school bus and go over to the high school for band practice. So I said, she'll never miss me. So I got up and went with them. And they said, well, what are you doing? I said, I'm joining the band. Well, what do you want to play? I said, I don't know. They said, well, you want to play the baritone horn because that's the only instrument he's got left. So I got to the high school. Mr. Robinson said, who are you? And I told him who I was. And I said, what are you doing here? I'm joining the band. Oh, well, what do you want to play? I want to play the baritone horn. I just happen to have one. So he put that in my hands, and it was just the greatest thing. And then, but I couldn't let my mother find out that I was taking band. And that went on for several weeks. And finally she found out.
How
And
old
then,
were you at that time?
well, let's see, I was 12.
Oh my goodness. So do you have an idea of like what drew you to the band?
I have no idea. But I remember that guy coming in with all those instruments, trumpets and clarinets and all that, and playing them. And I just thought, that is the greatest thing in the world. I had no idea. I didn't even know the names of the instruments. So anyway, my mother found out, and I guess there was a big argument between my band director and her, and he won. That's why I'm here.
That's why you're here. I mean, a baritone, that's a big instrument for a 12-year-old kid.
Yeah, and it made it very big because it was an old World War II double bell euphonium.
Double bell.
Double bells. They have small bell and the big bell.
Wow.
And they had a valve so all the sound can come out of the small bell. It was a valve trombone euphonium connected. But if you listen to the lyrics of 76 trombones, you will hear it. You will hear the term double bell euphonium.
76 trombones. That is famous from The Music Man, right?
That's The Music Man.
Yeah, we watched that not so long ago. The old one, the original one. Oh, a fantastic movie. So it started at that pretty early age, and you played consistently up until your time at Indiana?
Yeah, well, I went in the 8th grade. I'm still academically a disaster. So I guess you would call it, fortunately, I got sick toward the end of the 8th grade, 8th grade. And Mrs. Parsons came to the house. I had rheumatic fever. And she said, I can give you these exams, and you might pass them, but if you do, you go on to high school, but you'll never make it through high school. You don't have what it takes. She says, I recommend that you take this 8th grade again. She wanted to fail me. And I said, okay, I'll do it as long as I'm in your classroom. That woman, her name was Mrs. Parsons. That woman showed up before school started and worked with me every day and stayed after school and worked with me. By the time I finished my second year in the 8th grade, I had caught up.
Wow.
And I went on to high school.
Wow.
mean, there is my motivation is Mrs. Parsons. So she left. She went to Florida, and then years later, I'm walking in my hometown, and I can see her coming up the sidewalk. And I thought, oh my gosh, I haven't seen her since I was in the 8th grade. So she gets there, and she says, "What happened?" Well, I went on to high school. I graduated pretty much at the top of the class. I then went to Indiana University and majored in music. And then I taught high school band for 3 years. And then I went to the University of Michigan for graduate work. And now I'm on my way to San Luis Obispo, California, to be the director of bands at the California Polytechnic State University. She starts crying.
Yeah.
And I mean, so, if she's going to work that hard for me, it's called pay it forward. I've got to do that for my students.
Well, so speaking as a former student, I think you've certainly done that. And I think a lot of people would agree.
Well, that was my motivation. To pay her back. Plus, I had an incredible mentor at the University of Michigan. He was not the easiest guy to get along with, but he had a big heart, and he hired me as his graduate assistant. So I was with him all day long and night, and I learned so much from him. Absolutely incredible. So he called me in his office one day, and he said, I'll back up a little bit. I went to his office after being there for a semester, thinking that I've made some sort of a positive impression on him. And I said, "Dr. Ravelli, could you help me find a job?" "Well, what job do you want?" "Well, I had been in Indiana for 3 years, and there's some incredible bands down there, in the high school bands." Mm-hmm. I said, I want to be one of the high school bands in Indiana. And he says, "No, I won't help you at all." I said, "Well, why?" He says, "Well, you've already had high school teaching experience. We like for our people to be teach at the college level." And I thought, there's no way I can teach at the college level. So one day he called me in his office and he says, "Get to the travel agency." And I said, "What for?" He said, "Pick up your ticket. You're flying to California tomorrow."
To slow,
yeah. Wow. So I've and he says, they're going to interview you, and at the end of the day, they're going to offer you the job as director of bands, and you're going to take it. And I said to myself, there is no way I'm going to go to California. That's too far away. I hadn't been west of the Mississippi River yet.
Wow.
So I was picked up at the airport, and the department head said, "Well, the first thing that's going to happen, you're going to be interviewed by the dean of the school, and he's going to ask you questions for 2 hours." I said to myself, "That's it. No, I can't. No way I could pass that." So there's no way they'll hire me after that. So guess what the questions were? Describe in detail the inner workings of the Michigan band. I'm running the thing. I'm the grad assistant. I'll do all the dirty work.
Yeah.
So by the end of the day, just like you said, they offered me the job, and I took it. So and 44 years later, I retired.
That is crazy.
Isn't that crazy?
That's amazing. I mean, I never knew how you ended up at Cal Poly, and that's a fantastic story.
Well, I didn't. I resisted it. I didn't want to go to California. Never, I never heard of Cal Poly, except for I actually had heard of Cal Poly because of the airplane crash.
Oh, right.
1960. Mm-hmm. Remember that?
Yeah.
Remember, that was still pretty much on the edge of people's minds when I arrived. But when I arrived at Cal Poly, I thought, oh my gosh, this is the most beautiful place in the world. Did you know how many students there were? 7,000.
Oh,
You know how many students there are now?
it's got to be over
20,000.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's a very different, well, at that time, a very different global setting, very different school, very different student population.
Oh my gosh, yes. And there were three things that were important to the university: engineering, architecture, and agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
That was the main thing. And I got to be a very good friend of the dean of architecture. He and I would have all kinds of conversations. We realized that architecture and music are very closely related. We use the same language, same words.
Interesting.
Yeah. But I've had so many wonderful architect majors in the band. You one of them. And then there's
I struggled sometimes. It's it was odd for me because through high school and even before that, like, music was my big passion. And then when I got to Cal Poly, it was a bit of an odd thing because I fell in love with architecture, of course, but I was part of the band still. So I had this kind of weird dual life in a sense, and I always felt the two were connected, but there's only so much time in the day, and as being as unorganized as I was, it was a struggle at times, I have to admit.
First of all, I could never figure out how an architect major could be in the band, because the demands were, academic demands on you were so high. And, but I have had, the most prominent one was Steve James. I think I sent you some information about Steve. Steve was back, and I think he graduated in the late 70s, 77 or something like that. 1977. And Steve had never played in his high school band. He had been in a Dixieland band and was trained to play the clarinet as a Dixieland player.
Wow.
And I thought, well, if you can play Dixieland, you can play concert band music too. So I put him in the concert band. He loved it, and he was a powerful force. And then there was an architect major by the name of Eric Schmidt. Eric came to me and said, I want to write a piece for the band to play. And I said, sure, go ahead. So he writes this piece. He calls it the Middle Earth Suite, based on the Tolkien trilogy. The Middle Earth Suite, and it was an incredible piece. We played it at a concert, took it on tour and all that. And then Eric told me, he says, I want to be a composer. That's my career. Wow. I said, but you're an architect major. He said, I know, but I want to be a composer. I said, well, at the time we didn't even have a degree program in music at Cal Poly. So he couldn't switch to music because we didn't have a music program, a bachelor of music. So I said, well, Eric, you're going to have to transfer to Northridge, Cal State Northridge. And I was very close. I taught there for a while, for one semester. And he did. He transferred to Cal State Northridge, majored in composition. And then it wasn't very long after he graduated that he was writing cartoon music for Warner Brothers.
Whoa.
Big time stuff.
Big time.
And conducting professional players, studio players every day. And now guess what he is? He's a professor of film composing at USC.
Oh, that's big then. USC is really well known for film school.
Oh yeah. So that's where he is now. He's teaching it. When I suggested that to him, a few weeks later, I was talking to his father, and his father said, "This better work." and his father was an architect.
Oh my! Well, I think a lot of fathers who are architects would be happy if their kids did not go into architecture. It's a brutal profession.
Yes, it's a brutal profession. It's a brutal thing when you're a student.
Yeah,
I don't see how. first of all, can't understand how any architect major could be in the band. That's just because they spend the night in their studios drawing and all that.
Yeah, a lot of coffee is what it takes.
A lot of coffee.
Yeah, a lot of coffee.
That's great.
But so when you joined at Cal Poly, did they have a marching band? Like, what was in place?
Well, it was a pretty sad situation. I had 20 students returning, and I realized that there's no way in the world I can put 20 people out on the football field. Mm-hmm. I mean, those days, football was really big. We had big crowds. So I spent the summer after I arrived in San Luis Obispo, spent the summer recruiting and managed to recruit 30 people. Hmm. So added that to the 20, and I had a 50-piece band.
Oh, wow. An additional 30.
Yeah, an additional 30.
That's pretty good.
So I had 50 in the band. But the band in those days, we had to do it all. You played for every football game, mm-hmm. and traveled for one game, and then play for basketball games, and then put on concerts. Same people. Mm-hmm. And then to make it fun for me, when I first arrived at Cal Poly, I had students in the band that were older than me.
I was going to ask, actually, how old were you when you started?
I was 26.
Oh, that's a lot of responsibility for a 26-year-old.
26 years old, yeah. But then I had a whole bunch of people, men, they were men, not women, who were on GI Bill because they had been in combat in Vietnam. And it was the funniest thing. I put them out on the field, and I say, okay, the first thing we're going to do is learn how to stand at attention. And all those combat guys just fell over laughing. They thought it was the craziest thing. And we became, instead of teacher-student, we were just friends. We were big buddies. So a lot of them were older than me.
Yeah.
27, 28 years old, and I just realized that I had to grow into the job. But I had a lot of help. The students were wonderful. The faculty was wonderful. And my mentor from the University of Michigan came out and guest conducted at a concert. And those were good days. And my mentor was very famous. He was William Ravelli, and he was known for producing incredible bands. In fact, during the Cold War, the United States State Department sent the Michigan band on a tour of the Soviet Union. Can you believe that?
That's an interesting crowd.
Oh man, yeah. And well, I guess they made a big hit there, and then they came back, and there were still people who had gone on that trip. I missed it. I was at Indiana University myself. I didn't get to go, but that would have been an incredible thing. That was in 1960.
That's so intense.
Yeah. But he was an incredible band director. And most big universities like that would have their assistant be in charge of the marching band.
Really?
But he came to every rehearsal, stood up on the ladder in our performances, and conducted the band. We'd sound like a large pipe organ on the field. There were 400 of us.
Oh, goodness. That pretty much fills up the field.
Oh, it does. It does. And the sound was unbelievable. And a lot of it was because he took no shortcuts in producing beautiful sounds. And you mentioned in your talking points these mantras, but the one I learned when I first arrived in Ann Arbor was not as good as, but better than.
Right. There was another one. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And I thought that was rather egotistical, because they were thinking that, well, Michigan's not as good as, but we're better than all the others. That wasn't it at all. What it meant was that every time you do something, the next time you do it has to be better than and not as good as.
Right.
And if you have a rehearsal, that rehearsal's got to be better than the last rehearsal. If you're going to practice, that practice session has got to be better than the last one. And if it's as good as, then you failed.
It's interesting, and I mean, I agree with the lesson, and there's a couple other ones that I remember that used to say. I'm sure there's a bunch, but one of them, the two that I remember distinctly was, you would ask the group, the ensembles, like, what is our primary objective?
Oh yes.
And then you would say, I might be misquoting, but I believe it was to make beautiful sounds.
To make a beautiful sound. That's right.
It's such a simple way to sum up, what we're trying to do. And it always brought a level of focus and clarity when people were getting lost.
Well, a lot of that came from Star Wars. Remember the Prime Directive?
Yeah.
Prime Directive is to make a beautiful sound. The problem is young players, they get so much into technique, they're not really listening to themselves. And I said, well, if you just listen to yourself and make sure that the sound coming out of your instrument is beautiful, then you're going to be fine. But if you have all these flying fingers and everything for technique and it doesn't sound good, then that's a waste of time. So I put a lot of emphasis on sound.
Yes, and I do remember that we would spend a lot of times as a group working on just the intonation and sound and the color of it.
Absolutely. And that, a lot of people think that, well, that's great for the concert band, but that's a waste of time for marching band. Oh, no, it isn't. Marching band should play in tune. Well, I'll tell you, Ravelli, we met every day with the marching band for 2 hours every day. And he would spend sometimes 20, 30 minutes on 4 measures, making sure that everybody was playing them right. I couldn't believe that kind of intensity. So one day, I was in the Symphony band. That was the indoor group. And I watched his rehearsal, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing, because I'd been a high school band director for 3 years, and I'd been to Indiana University, got a degree in music from there, and played in the band. And what he was doing was totally different. So I decided that the next rehearsal I'd show up with a yellow pad and start taking notes, because I wanted to learn all this stuff. And he stopped the rehearsal that day, and he looked back there and he says, "You there?" And he knew who I was. I'm his grad assistant. "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm taking notes." He says, "Put that away. You'll never forget this." And he was right. I mean, that was the most intense year of my life, was graduate school with the University of Michigan with Bill Ravelli. Oh my gosh, that was unbelievable. It was for several years after I came to Cal Poly, I'd wake up in the middle of the night with nightmares, thinking that he'd called an extra rehearsal and I didn't know anything about it. So they got there and the chairs and stands weren't set up and the percussion weren't out of it. I just lived in fear for about a year. He was unbelievable. I wouldn't want to do that to my students.
Well, I was going to ask, those nightmares, how long did they last before they went away?
A couple of years.
It's funny, and I don't think it has to do with you, it's probably more to do with me. I have, and Marina knows this because I talk about it, I have nightmares or panic dreams where I'm late to a rehearsal. I don't know why.
Yes, exactly. That was the same type of dream I had.
It's the worst.
Well, here's the thing. The symphony band was about 125 people, and it met in a large rehearsal room. But the large rehearsal room was used by a lot of other groups too. So you had to pull all the chairs out, put the music stands where they belong, and then you pull the percussion out. It took me an hour and a half of preparation for a rehearsal.
Oh,
wow!
and we rehearsed every day for 2 hours. And so my dream was he'd called an extra rehearsal, and I didn't know anything about it. So he'd arrived, everybody arrived, and no chairs were set up, no music stands, no percussion. It was all my fault.
Yeah. 120 people standing around. What's going on?
Exactly. What's going on? Yeah. What happened?
Yeah. I mean, it's a similar thing, not to go too far on the tangent, but when it comes time for the actual performance for a concert, there's a lot of last minute kind of things that you have to be aware of. Like, you're wearing different clothes, you have to keep track of all your equipment, your music. And, I have this frequent dream that somehow my music got misplaced, which is like the worst thing.
Oh, that's awful. That's terrible. Yeah.
So I don't know what that says about me, but I want to go back to the focus on beautiful sounds. I think there's 2 points from that I think is really interesting. The first is that there's a sense of discipline with a focus that you would make something really, really good, and then that exercise of 4 measures or whatever it be bleeds over into everything else you do.
Absolutely. That's what he did. He would spend nearly an hour on 4 measures, but then that affected all the other measures, because he zeroed in, and he would walk down. We had 40 clarinet players.
Whoa.
It was a 125-piece band, so we had 40 clarinet players, and he'd walk down the rows and say, "You play it," and they would play it. "Leave it out. You play it. Okay, you can." So the time he got through all 40 clarinet players, there were only 20 of them going to play that passage, and it was oh man, the pressure. I mean, I was, by the time I got to Cal Poly, I thought, oh my gosh, this is so much easier than being in graduate school. And, I had wonderful students. All the years I was at Cal Poly, I had wonderful students. Just incredible students. And I'm still working with a lot of them.
Yeah, and I want to ask about the student body that you worked with. But briefly, one last point with the focus on beautiful sounds. It's something that you said that with younger players, there tends to be a focus on technique, which of course is important.
That's right.
But unless you're creating beautiful sounds, it's pointless. And there are for sure a lot of parallels with architecture and design.
Oh gosh, yes.
You can have all the technique in the world and know all the skills, but unless you're making something that's beautiful, or whatever other checklist that we have for our profession, what's the point?
Yeah, that's. I remember those long conversations I had with the Dean of Architecture, Dean Hassler, and we talked about that sort of thing, and we talked about the fact that we talked about the various words that we use in formant analysis and all this kind of stuff. And it's the same. The architects use the same terms.
So then, with the students, one question I did have is, at least when I was there was a music major, but interestingly, a lot of the students in the wind ensemble, wind orchestra, the wind groups, are not music majors.
Well, here's how that works. At Cal Poly, all due respect to the music majors, the ones with the incredible brains are the architect students and the engineering students. So the band gets filled up with engineering students, and not so many architects. Well, it's almost impossible to be in the band when you're an architect major. But engineers, about, I would say half of the band was engineering students. Various types of engineering, electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, and et cetera, et cetera. But these kids are brilliant. They are so smart. And that has a lot to do with, if you're going to play a musical instrument, intelligence is so important. As all due respect to the music majors, and the music majors are taking private lessons, that puts them ahead a little bit. But it's not unusual for the principal clarinet player, the concert master, of the entire organization to be an engineering student. That's I think if you look at, even now with all the music majors we have, if you looked at the principal players and in almost every section, they're engineers or architect or computer science.
Right.
They're just so smart, and they can take a piece of music that is massively difficult to learn, and they've got the brain power to do it.
Is there something? Is it? Did you think it has to do with like the ability to think abstractly, and it translates to music somehow?
Well, I don't know. I think it's just sheer intelligence, and and I think when you're dealing with complexity, that if your ability to deal with complexity in an intelligent way really pays off, and I think that I would right now. I would hate to be a music major in the Cal Poly band because there are non-majors that would play probably better than me. Mm. I mean, those are incredible players, and you think, well, how can they be that good? Well, they were good when they arrived, and then they continue to practice, and some of them take private lessons.
Yeah,
they'll come to our faculty and say, "I want to take private lessons." They're so into playing their instrument, and this is why the Cal Poly band has risen to be such a powerful organization. Now, I don't know if you realize it or not, but I built that organization on travel. We have traveled all over the world with the Cal Poly band.
Right.
In 1975, we were in Vienna. In the early 80s, we were in Switzerland. Then we went to Japan for three weeks, played concerts there every night.
Wow.
And here's how you motivate Cal Poly students if you're going to have a tour to Japan. You get recordings of their middle school bands. This is Japan. You get recordings of middle school bands, and you play those recordings, and they sound like university bands. And I said, now we're going to go to Japan, and we're going to be sponsored by all kinds of schools, mostly high schools, and that's the level. And they were shaking in their boots after hearing that. But they were highly motivated. And motivation is the key to success in education. You've got the students have to be motivated, and self-motivation is the best kind. You can try to motivate somebody, but when they motivate themselves, it's phenomenal what they were able to do. We went to Japan, and we would play up to 6 encores. I'd have to tell the guy to turn the lights off. Then we stayed around for an hour and a half signing autographs.
Wow, interesting.
My students said, we feel like rock stars here. And that was a great trip. Then we went to New Zealand. We toured all over New Zealand because I had been there. I was the conductor of the New Zealand National Youth Wind Orchestra. And then from there, we went over to Sydney and played in the Sydney Opera House.
That's incredible.
And then after that, we went on a tour to Hungary, and then back to Vienna, and then over Armagall and Munich, and Karlovy Vary, and then Prague. And then the last big trip was the Walt Disney Concert Hall. That was my last year.
Right. That's a lot of traveling. It's impressive. I wanted to ask, the program started off where it was when you joined, and then when you left, it was much bigger, and a lot of factors go into growing a program. What was the biggest challenge with, how did it evolve from where it started with, was it 20 people and whatnot to?
Yeah, started with 20 people, and I recruited 30, so I had 50. And that 50 did everything. They played for all the football games, played all the concerts, basketball, even wrestling. We played for wrestling.
Really?
Yes. And
awesome.
wrestling was very big at Cal Poly in those days.
Really?
And but then the program kept growing, and by the time I retired, there were 370 students in the band program.
Wow.
And pretty soon, back in 2006, was when we hired Professor Woodruff.
Hmm.
And it took me a long time to get them to give me an associate to work with, because one person can't handle 375 students.
Wait, so did you not have an associate before Woodruff?
No.
Holy smokes.
He's the first one.
Oh, that must have felt nice.
Oh, I couldn't. It was so great when he arrived, and now he's director of bands.
Yep.
He's got, but he's going through what all band directors are going through now, and that's this COVID-19 stuff.
Yeah,
and everything is now virtual. I saw his band fest, and I felt so bad for him. And then I have a former student. I don't know if you remember Lauren Watchenchuk, saxophone player.
The name sounds familiar.
Yeah, she's now director of bands at University of California, Riverside.
Oh, wow.
So I coach her. With FaceTime and all that kind of stuff. We have long conversations, and she's doing a tremendous job. She's a great conductor. I've had two students that entered my advanced conducting class,
mm-hmm.
and I personally changed their lives. When Anna was from South Lake Tahoe. She was just an average clarinet player, but she was a music major. And we didn't have a music major until the early 90s. So she came to my advanced conducting class, and I had given her an assignment, and she conducted, and I was totally blown away with her natural talent as a conductor. Mm. So, it was a natural talent that she had no idea that she had. So I hauled her into the office, and I said, Anna, your career changed today. Instead of being a clarinet player, you still play clarinet, but your main focus is conducting. I said, from now on, you're going to conduct one piece on every concert we do, and we videotape you. And I'm going to take a collage of that videotape, and I'm going to send it to all the top band conductors in the United States, and somebody will discover you. So I did that, and it was a Southern Methodist picked her up right away and put her on the faculty.
Wow.
She was teaching undergraduate conducting, and then from there she goes to the Northwestern University, gets her doctorate in orchestral conducting. And Leonard Slatkin, the famous conductor from Washington, D.C. at the time, conducting the National Symphony Orchestra, he discovered her and brought her to Washington as his associate. And that comes from a girl who just comes to a conducting class. But I just knew. And Lauren is another one of those. So Lauren is a lot younger. But now she'll conduct the Chicago Symphony someday. Those two ladies are my pride and joy.
That's amazing. So, I do want to talk about, what it takes to be a conductor and a director of bands, which is they're perhaps different things. But staying with the conductor for the moment, for people who listening who might not understand what their role is, could you describe to us? It's actually a very complicated thing, right? But could you describe to us basically what a conductor does? And also, I'm curious if you have a sense of what makes a good conductor?
Yeah, I do have a sense of what makes a good conductor, because I had probably the finest conducting teacher who ever lived. That was Elizabeth Green. She wrote the book on conducting, and she was a professor at the University of Michigan. And there's a lot of technique involved, huge amount of technique. But in addition to that, there's the concept of leadership. That's probably as important as any technique you might have as a conductor, is leadership. And leadership comes from being able to motivate people, so that they're enthusiastic. You have to be enthusiastic yourself, and that just spreads. And then they self-motivate, and when they arrive at a rehearsal, they're so excited. And then you have the rehearsal planned in detail, then you get a lot done. But you can't just go wing it.
Right.
There's none of that. It's because conducting is an incredible challenge.
It's odd to me because, right, for people who don't know, like, the conductor is the one who leads a rehearsal. He's also the guy who's up in the front with the stick, the baton, and he keeps time. And so there's all the technical things of the movements that have to convey certain aspects. But there's also, like you said, the leadership fact of, like, I think people who have guest conducted or been a drum major or whatever understand what it's, right, get a taste of what it's like. But for people who have not done that, it's really, really strange and to be in front of a group of, let's say, 120 people or 70 people, have all eyes on you, and every 10th of a second your gestures are being read from all these different directions, and they're looking to you to lead.
Yeah, and you can make the group sound very bad.
It's weird how that works. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and so, well, I think there are two things. Preparation is you can't go into a rehearsal unprepared. Now, preparation means that you have in detail know what you're supposed to try to accomplish in that rehearsal, and it's based on the last rehearsal. Mm-hmm. You remember everything that needs to be worked on. You can't conquer Rome in a day, so you can't go in and beat them to death, but you have to have a plan. You execute that plan. If you don't have the plan and you're just up to waving the stick, that gets you nowhere. The musicians catch on to that real fast. First of all, you have to know the score extremely well, and you have to know the scores. Knowing the score is being honest to the composer, you know, and conducting good rehearsals is honest to the musicians, and it's composer and musicians that make the sound, make it beautiful.
Yeah, you had prior to our recording, you had sent us actually a short write up, a full page actually of things that the conductor does.
Isn't that scary?
It is scary because I might, if it's okay, I'll ask you, but I'd love to post this somewhere for people to see, because there's maybe 8 or 9 points, and it covers every different aspect that you could think of, from like the technical to the research to being in the moment. And, reading it makes you realize what a daunting task it is, because it requires not only skill and dedication, but there's maybe, I don't know if talent's the right word, but there's something else there that, like, a lot of people I think can be good researchers and be skilled and intelligent in that way, but that's very different from being in front of a group, live.
First of all, you have to have what we call big ears. You have to be able to hear things that most people can't hear. And I'm not talking about volume or anything. It's just a sound. The whole group's playing a chord, and one person is out of tune on that chord. You got to know who that person is,
right? And
you got to know why they played it out of tune. Maybe it's the clarinet playing A. Well, they don't know to put the other two fingers down. It's a trumpet player playing D, fourth line D, and doesn't know to put the third finger down. And or use the tuning
slide, yeah,
tuning slides, you know. And so a lot of that is just teaching them to listen. Listening is the main thing. And you also have to have a sound concept. I think on that list is the sound concept.
Yeah, this is very interesting. What is a sound concept?
A sound concept is that you have internalized the composition, and you have in your mind, based on not on recordings, but although you listen to recordings, but you take the score and any recordings you've got, and then you form your own concept of what that piece sounds like and what it should sound like. And then you just go into rehearsal and try to accomplish it. Try to do whatever it takes to get there. And sometimes it's very frustrating. I record rehearsals and go home and listen to them, and it's just, oh my gosh, it's so bad. But then you have to have a plan. You have to diagnose the problem and prescribe a way to beat it. You know, a way to make it sound good. And it's not the easiest thing to do. Conducting is tough. But it's the one thing I wanted to do. I had no idea when I wanted to do that. I was 12 years old when I decided I was going to be a band director.
Really?
And, oh yeah, 12 years old, and that never ever changed. And my hometown doctor did everything he could to get me to go to medical school, and no way in the world I'd do that. Music was it. And it was just, it all comes from that day Mr. Robinson showed up in the 6th grade class.
Right.
That's where it started.
Right.
Now, this is an interesting story. This is symphonic band or wind ensemble. It's marching band. I had, as you remember, the marching band, there were 2 drum majors.
Yes. Head
drum major and assistant drum major.
Yeah.
Well, my assistant drum major, and I don't have any idea what year this was. It was a long time ago. He was really angry that he wasn't the head drum major. And every rehearsal out on the field, and he was needling me like crazy. And I said, okay, that's it. I'll see you in my office after rehearsal.
That's not good.
That's not good.
That's bad news.
That's bad news. So he comes in and shut the door. And I hand him a sheet of paper. I said, number it from 1 to 10. So he numbered it 1 to 10. And then I make up 10 things that he has to do to be successful in life. I have no idea what I said. I just made it up. And he wrote them all down. And I said, "Now you keep that." So he left. Years later, he graduated, went to Washington, D.C. and worked for the Interior Department. Then later, he became the superintendent of Sequoia National Park in Kings Canyon. And we had the band over. I had the band over in Porterville and played a concert there. And he was there, and he wanted to speak to the band, so he did. And afterwards, he said, "I want to take you to dinner." Okay, we'll go to dinner. We get to dinner, and during the dinner, he opens up his billfold and pulls out this ragged sheet of paper. And he says, "That is how I did it. That's why I'm the superintendent of Sequoia National Park."
Wow.
And I about flipped out, and it was all tattered and everything. He says, "I look at it every day."
Okay, what was on that list, Jay? We need to
know. I have no idea. but I was highly motivated to come up with 10 things that make a difference. And, but he took it at heart.
I do remember that, obviously when I had you as a director, that was at the back end of your career, and you had this way of speaking. It didn't matter if it was talking one-on-one with you, or I was sitting in the ensemble amongst 100 people and then you were talking to the group, but you had a way of speaking where it just instilled complete confidence in everyone who was listening. And it's confidence and that, I don't know, that we're intrigued that we were going to go somewhere based on what you said. And I this is kind of a philosophical question, I suppose, but did you always have that skill set, or did that develop over your time at Cal Poly? Because I've been in enough ensembles and been in enough, other design organizations where leaders, a lot of good leaders, don't have that quality.
Well, this is what I learned from Dr. Ravelli. Ravelli, as great as he was, says, I teach people, not music. And I thought, well, that's really strange. But what he meant was that your motivation, everything you do, is to improve that student, make that student a better at what they're doing. And if you have the students' goals at heart, then that changes everything. Now, if the most important thing is making the beautiful sound, that's important, but it's not as important as teaching the student, and you teach by example. So I tried to be a good example. The thing that I taught the most was enthusiasm. If you've got enthusiasm, everything works. If you don't have the enthusiasm, nothing works. And so I just work with people and you get to know them. I mean, if you remember auditioning with me?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Well, I probably asked you where your hometown was and all kinds of stuff, what your major was, and all that, because you got to know the students, and your motivation has got to be to make them successful, and not making yourself successful. You got to make them successful. So that's, I guess, what you're talking about is that I don't think about that. It's not a plan. It's not something that I plan to do. It's just that's the way I'm built. And I'm built that way because of the teachers I had.
Right.
My private teacher at Indiana University on the euphonium, his name was Bill Bell. Now, Mr. Bell retired from the New York Philharmonic and came to Indiana University and to teach, because he was tired of playing. But he was John Philip Sousa's tuba player. Oh my gosh. That was just knowing that was made a big impression on me.
Right.
So, but you have to understand, I was born at the beginning of World War II. And that in a world war, people are different. That was a horrible time.
People are different in what way?
Well, for example, I remember as a little boy standing in front of my dad's movie theater. I grew up in the movie theater, and on Main Street, and there was a convoy of tanks. They were coming up the main street. Now, the main street had been paved in concrete. It was beautiful. Those tanks chewed it all up, and nobody cared. I mean, there's the difference.
Yeah.
I mean, no one said, well, those tanks destroyed our street. Too bad. And that's what I grew up with. I grew up under a war. And and all my toys as a child were tanks and airplanes and jeeps and guns.
Right.
I mean, it was unbelievable.
Huh.
And that was an incredible upbringing. No question about it. Then when I first got to Cal Poly, I was at the age to be drafted to go to Vietnam. I had a draft card right in my hand, and I was waiting to be called for a physical. I never got the call, and I sure wasn't going to volunteer.
Yeah.
Not for that war. So I've had a lot of influences, and you see how I was, but I don't see that. I mean, I'm glad you saw a good thing, but there's nothing that I try to do to be that way. I'm just lucky enough to have had good teachers. And the teacher said that education, teaching the student is the highest priority. As Ravelli used to say, I teach people, I don't teach music.
I think it's a powerful concept, and is actually one that actually we were talking about it not too long ago within our profession, in that sometimes I think architecture teachers focus a lot on the buildings, which makes sense, but they kind of forget to understand who the student is, which is a necessary information to have before you can embark on any meaningful conversation.
That's right. You got to know your students. You need to know as much about them as you possibly can.
Right.
And then once you do know them, then you know what their motivation is. And it hasn't always been easy. I've dealt with some difficult students, really difficult. That was one thing I learned at Michigan, is how to deal with that. And sometimes I would be it's tough love, and that was hard. That was really, because I want to get along with the students, but there are students that you can't get along with, and those are challenges, and I like challenges. So I would focus in on those students, and sometimes I was successful, and sometimes I wasn't.
Well, so that's a good question then. Actually, how do you? I mean, it depends on the particular situation and the student involved, but how do you address someone who is being so challenging? And the other aspect of ensembles that's interesting, especially with a place like Cal Poly, is that everyone volunteers to be part of the band. I mean, if you're a music major, you have to be part of it, I presume. But people are volunteering to be there.
Well, if you're a music major, you don't have to be in the band. You just have to be in. You have to be in a performing group. A performing group, right? So if they don't like the band, they can join the choir,
right,
or orchestra or whatever. So you want to make it so that people want to be in the band and not have to be in the band, and that's the thing about music majors. The beauty of a non-major, they all want to be in the band,
right?
Because if they didn't want to be in the band, they wouldn't. That they would, because why would you be in the band if you're an architect major? Unless that's something you really wanted to do. And so, and to answer your question, I had a student once. I was thinking of that. We're on tour and we're in Austria. I had this young man, and we were in Schladming, not Seefeld. We were in Seefeld, Austria. And this guy was He was a real problem. And I think that when you've got you can't, life will tell you nothing is perfect. So I had 77 people there, and one of them was a complete disaster. And I should have known. Carmine Calitri was his name. And I said to Carmine, this is 1975. I said, Carmine, you showed up at a rehearsal having taken drugs. And you got drugs with you. I said, you get rid of them, or you will get on the next flight to California. Boy, he got rid of those. I had no problem with him after that. So it's leverage. If you don't have some leverage, and you think, well, grades. I would not teach a band class at Cal Poly unless they were enrolled in a class. In that class, they're going to get a grade, mostly A's, some B's, but there's a possibility they could get a C or D or an F, and that's called leverage. So you've got to have some leverage, and that's that sounds like being a little bit mean, but I think if they know that you have their best interest in mind, then you can not be mean, but you can ask a lot, which kind of comes off as being mean.
Well, I think also too, there's an understanding of commitment to the group that you're part of, not just to yourself and the director, but you have X number of other people who have all hopefully figured out how to get themselves together to show up, to be ready, and to go. And if you show up late, it's just as a human being, it's a bad feeling. You're letting everyone down.
Well, I know you've heard this 1,000 times. If you're on time, if you're early, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late.
No, it's haunting memories.
You remember that?
I do. Yeah, I do. Yeah.
I learned that at Michigan. And boy, if you were, in my case, I had to be there 2 hours before rehearsal. But if I showed up at a rehearsal, but if I was a regular student and show up at a rehearsal on time, I'm late.
Yeah.
So everything you do, you show up early. And, setting that example will help careers tremendously. People who go out into careers in engineering, architecture, computer science, music, whatever, and they're always on time, which means they're early. That says a lot. And if a person is always punctual, then that is one of the most professional things you can do. And I teach that by example.
Right.
I get there early myself.
It's an interesting thing with a lot of these ensembles because there's definitely a very strong sense of discipline.
Oh yeah.
Obviously in the marching bands, but even in the wind ensembles, it's like this is an interesting. I don't know how interesting the story is, but I remember the rehearsals would take place from like 6 to 8 or 6 to 7:30 or something bizarre.
Right. Yeah.
Which is kind of a tough time, really, because everyone's
terrible
tired.
Time. It's right during dinner.
Yeah.
And you've gone through school all day. It's an awful time. I'm well aware of that.
Yeah. And, I would be in the studio working, and then I would have to like panic rush to get up to eat a pizza and then go up to the rehearsal. And one of my colleagues, an architecture student, was like, and this was like before a deadline, right? And he asked, well, why don't you just don't go? He's like, just don't go. You have other things to do. You have this big project. You're an architecture major. Why don't you just not go? And for me, it's memorable because that question never even came into my mind ever. And I looked at him, I thought, like, that's not an option. Like, what are you talking about?
No, it's not an option.
And I
No.
don't know where that sense of, I guess, commitment comes
Well,
from.
a lot of that, I mean, you should thank your parents for that, and your teachers that you had all through elementary school and high school. They taught you a lot, and you learned a lot. Otherwise, there's no way you'd be able to be functional in architecture.
No.
That is the hardest thing. That's worse than music. I mean, it's a real challenge.
It's tough, though. I do have to say with architecture that I can power through. With playing a brass instrument, the chops turn to, minced meat after a period of time. It's quite frustrating.
Brass players really take a beating. There's no question about it. A lot of it is just learning to warm up, and you get so far behind, and you get so busy that the idea is to get to the rehearsal and be functional in rehearsal, but you can't be there in rehearsal functional unless you've warmed up, and that takes extra time.
Yeah.
Thus, if you're early, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late.
The other thing too is that you were involved in a number of different ensembles, and for me, just from my experience, there's a big difference potentially between like the marching band and a wind ensemble where you're seated on stage. Were you always equally drawn to both?
No. No, I was far more drawn to the indoor concert setting than the outdoor marching band. On the other hand, when I was at Michigan, I was in the marching band there, all 400 of us. And the conductor was the director of bands. And so Ravelli made no difference between the marching band and the symphony band. I mean, they were bands. Marching band was expected to play in tune. Symphony band expected to play in tune, and it just don't make any difference. So that was my approach with marching band. Now I'll have to say that that when it comes, if somebody were to say, okay, now you can only conduct one of them, the marching band or the wind ensemble or the wind orchestra, I would let someone else do the marching band at the drop of a hat. Marching band there's a lot of stuff that goes on in the marching band that has nothing to do with music.
Right.
And just the formations and the marching itself, and I learned all that. I took a class in marching band techniques at the University of Michigan. And that was one of the toughest. It was a graduate class. And it was taught by the assistant conductor, who the assignment was you had to show up in class with I think 5 ideas for a halftime show that had never been done before. So I was so desperate to come up with things. And so I would turn mine in, and Mr. Cavender would write on there, Michigan Band, 1953. So it had all been done before. wasn't anything new to my. But conducting a marching band means you design the show, you develop the charts, and give the charts to the students. You've had charts before, and that's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And so much of it is not all that. I mean, it's entertainment. It's not music. It's not the art. It's not the art of music. And I prefer the art of music. Although I loved marching band, and marching band is a whole other ball game. But to be able to go watch a marching band and watch someone else do it is great.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. You can kind of live vicariously, but not have the risk of
exactly. Because I remember when you guys were doing pregame, I'm standing on the side of the field with Chris Woodruff, watching you enter the stadium and all that. And it was just great. I was glad I didn't have to organize it. It's just a lot of work.
Yeah, it is. And then and everyone's, if you're on the field, everyone in the audience can see you. And then if you're an individual on the field, there's this risk of the entire group turns one direction and you're the only person who's half a beat behind.
Oh, gosh.
But it's as visible as anything else. It's quite obvious.
I got to tell you about Tim Ford. He, like you, he's a graduate of Cal Poly. He was a trombone player. Tim came to Cal Poly as a freshman trombone player, played in the marching band. And then he went home for Christmas and was in a car accident, and he became permanently blind. And so he spent the rest of the year in blind school. Then he comes, his sophomore year, comes back to Cal Poly and wants to play in the band. And I thought, I've never had a blind person in the band before.
Yeah.
And he wants to be in the marching band. And I said, okay, Tim, you're going to be in the marching band. That's what you want to do. So we had the marching band in squads. So I put him in the as the number 2 person in a squad. And he just followed everybody. He was incredible. He's one of the best marchers on the field, and he was totally blind.
Oh, my goodness.
And I remember one rehearsal that he marched about 3 or 4 steps farther than the rest of the squad. It was a rehearsal, so I stopped and I said, "Tim, you need to step back a little bit and get it with your squad." And the squad said, "No, he's right. We're wrong."
Oh my!
And he was an incredible. One time he ended up being principal trombone player. He would get the music and let get someone to play it for him. Then he would play it correctly, and ended up being principal trombone player. And one time in rehearsal, I accused him of not watching. So he comes. I was so embarrassed. I was, how can you say something as stupid as that? And so he comes up to me and says, "Call me Jay, just like you do. Jay, that was the greatest compliment I've ever had since I've been blind." So I accused him of not watching.
Oh, that's too funny.
Oh, that was great. I still communicate with Tim. He's a lawyer now.
Wow.
Oh.
Very successful lawyer.
I mean, that's a special human being to be out in a field and be marching blind because
absolutely. And the rest of the band members were just so impressed with him.
Yeah, no excuse to mess up if you're next to Tim.
You don't mess up, not when Tim Ford is out there.
Yeah.
Oh, he really helped our band program. Then you asked me on the sheet there what was some of the accomplishments, things that I've done that I'm proud of.
Yeah.
I used to travel to Sydney, Australia a lot to work as a consultant with World Projects, because they ran a festival in a Sydney Opera House and Sydney Town Hall and all that, and I would go judge bands and work and do all kinds of stuff with bands. Then one day, right after 9/11 in New York, Bill Lutt, who was the owner of World Projects, came to my house here in Rio Grande, and he says, "I want to do something in New York that will help bring the tourist industry back, because the tourist industry was gone." This was right after 9/11. And I said, "Well, Bill, if you do that, you got to duplicate what you're doing in Sydney. And in Sydney, you're using the Opera House. And in New York, you use Carnegie Hall."
Mm-hmm.
And he looked at me sheepishly and said, "I can't afford Carnegie Hall." And so I said, well, if you can't afford Carnegie Hall, then don't do it. And because you want to duplicate what you're doing in Sydney. So he wasn't very happy with me. So he gets in his car and he drives off, and he went back. He lives in Berkeley. And he called me the next day and he says, Bill, I have Carnegie Hall, but you have to bring your band to play at the festival. I said, I will do it.
Wow.
So I'm going to be in New York 2 years right after 9/11. And so I want to put on a concert to honor the first responders and all those but I didn't want to come on too strong.
Yeah.
And so I sat around forever coming up with repertoire. So I came up with a repertoire. The first one was about 1.5 minutes, and it was called Without Warning. Oh man, that got everyone's attention. And it was a powerful piece by Steve Melillo. And then I chose, I heard Rudy Giuliani talking, giving a speech to, as he was retiring from the mayorship of New York. Mm-hmm. And he was quoting the Gettysburg Address. I said, that's it. I'm going to use Lincoln as the focal point of that concert. So we did Without Warning, and then we did Aaron Copland's Lincoln Portrait. And then we did David Maslanka's Fourth Symphony, which is based on Carl Sandburg's story of Lincoln. So the problem with doing the Lincoln Portrait meant that I had to have a narrator. So I thought, great, I'll get Rudy Giuliani to be my narrator. So I wrote him, and he turned me down because I didn't have any money. Oh. I notified, I asked all kinds of celebrities, and they all turned me down. And so I was really frustrated. I was going through the grocery line, and there were magazines there, and I picked up a magazine, and on one side was a picture of 9/11, and on the other side was a year later. So on the left side, I found a picture of a firefighter under a bunch of rubble, and he looked dead. Mm-hmm. And over on the right side, it showed that he had lost his entire ladder company and broken his neck. And he was surviving. So, and his name was Kevin Shea. So I said to myself, that's my narrator. So I sent an email message to the fire department. I said, have Kevin Shea email me. So 2 weeks later, Kevin sends an email and says, you rang? I liked that. And I said, yes, Kevin, I want you to be the narrator for Lincoln Portrait by Aaron Copland. And so 2 weeks after that, he calls me back and he says, well, my wife said I should do it, therefore I'll do it. So we arrived in New York, and we had a rehearsal of Lincoln Portrait, and he was there practicing his narration. And he wanted to talk to every kid in the band. And we were there for about an hour and a half so he could say something to every person one-on-one and sign something if they wanted it. He was fabulous. So then we get to the concert, and we start. I go off stage and I bring him on with me. He's in his dress uniform, and we play the Lincoln Portrait, and he was flawless, absolutely flawless. And the audience was full of policemen and firefighters because they knew he was going to be there. And of course, the festival members were there too. So Carnegie Hall was filled. And so we finished the concert, and I go off stage, and I said, Kevin, you follow me back out on the stage, and I'm going to do something. We're going to do something, but I'm not going to tell you what it is yet. So, so we go out on the stage, and the kids knew what I wanted to do. And I was, drum roll, Star Spangled Banner. Mm. And he stands there and salutes with, through the whole thing. I'll tell you, I will never forget that.
Wow.
Seeing him do that. And it was the exact day that America entered Iraq, and all the risk management people at Cal Poly were scared to death.
Right.
I had to have all kinds of plans that if you showed up at the hotel and it's bombed, then you go to such and such place. It was all in the itinerary.
Oh, that's true. That's another side of it too, because you're taking, I don't know how many, tens and tens of students to a place that was just attacked really, really not long ago.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I'll tell you, they played a concert like you cannot believe. And that Maslanka concert, the Maslanka piece, based on the book by who did I say it was? I can't remember now.
Yeah. Right.
There were two scenes from it, and the first scene that he took was of the president lying on a bed after he'd been shot. People were amazed at how relaxed he looked, but he was dead. And then later, the body is taken to Springfield, Illinois. On the way, it stopped in Columbus, Ohio, and was put into the rotunda there. As they came out, there was a brass band playing "Praise God from Whom All Blessings Flow," and that became the second theme of that piece, of Maslanka's Fourth Symphony. So we played that, and I'll tell you, there wasn't a dry eye in the house when we finished that piece.
I was going to ask, how did you get through it without breaking down?
Oh, it was hard. It was really, really hard. But you do what you have to do, you can't break down. And but I'll tell you, I told my students, I said, this is something you're going to be talking to your grandchildren about. And I'm sure they haven't done that.
Yeah.
A lot of them have grandchildren. That's what makes me feel so old, that I have students with grandchildren.
Yeah.
Oh man, that was one of the greatest things that's ever happened to us, is playing in Carnegie Hall. And then they made me artistic director for the next 19 years. I went to New York and served as artistic director for Carnegie Hall, except for this year, for 2021, it's canceled.
I was just going to say that that's another aspect of your career that's very interesting, and you mentioned it earlier on in this interview, that the traveling, but also the connections that you've built, and like I think it's very, it perhaps would be a lot easier, to just be a director of a group and then just do that. But you've done a bunch of other things, and you've continued to push even to now after you're not with Cal Poly. So
I mentioned that I taught at Northridge for a semester, and the reason I did that is that I'd taken the entire year off for a sabbatical leave, and I was going to take from January to June. I was going to be in Europe studying the British brass band. So, and I was going to just use the fall quarter just to relax, Then David Whitwell calls me. He was the band director at Northridge, and he says, "Johnson, you're going to be the band director at Northridge. I got a sabbatical. I'm going to be in Austria, so I need you in Northridge." Gosh, I said, "All right, I'll do it." So I went down, and I was director of bands at Cal State Northridge for a semester. Well, right before I left, I called my friend Frank Battisti. Frank was the conductor of the New England Conservatory group from Boston. And he was also president of the College of Band Directors National Association. and he'd already made it. He'd already announced that there was going to be an international conference taking place in Europe, and in 1981. So this was, I was going to arrive in Europe in January of '79, and I was going to, and he asked me to set the whole thing up for him, and he hadn't done a darn thing. It's typical of Frank. You know, great ideas, but never carries them out. And so I decided that I'm going to find a good place to have an international, the first ever international conference of wind band people. Never happened before.
Wow.
So I went all over London, and I talked to people in the world of music there. And they said, look, this has been tried before. Quit trying and do something else because it won't work. Well, all that does is motivate me. And so I was invited out to the British Bandsman magazine out at Uxbridge. So I went out there, and they published an article about why I was there to help get an international conference started. But everywhere I went, it was just negative. And the toward the last day, I got a call from a guy at Salford College that said there's going to be a concert at the Royal Northern College of Music, and you need to be there. And so I looked at my Brit Rail pass, and I had some time on it. So I jumped on a train and went from London to Manchester. And I walked into the Royal Northern College of Music, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is the perfect place for an international conference. And so the band director there got a hold of me, and I got a hold of him. And he said, before I could say anything, he said, you think there's a possibility that we could have the international conference here? And I said, and I didn't want to. I said, well, there's a possibility. I was just dying inside, you know. And so I left the next day and went to Stratford upon Avon, and I called Frank, got him out of bed, because I didn't know what time it was in Boston. And I said, Frank, the international conference is going to be in Manchester, England, in July 1981. I said, you need to get on the next flight and meet Tim Rainish. And he did. Wow. And so that organization is now a couple of thousand members, and I don't know how many countries, many countries, all over Europe and the United States, Asia, so I got to be secretary for a while, and then they elected me president, and my conference was in Hamamatsu, Japan, where they make all the Yamaha instruments. And then I was president again in 2017 for a conference in Utrecht in the Netherlands. So that's why I know so many people. I mean, when you're president, everybody wants you to come and guest conduct and all that kind of stuff. So I did all that, and that was so much fun. So it's called the World Association for Symphonic Bands and Ensembles, and it's called WASBE, WASBE.
And you were essentially the one to kick it off.
Yes.
That is crazy.
I'm one of the founders.
That's crazy, because that organization, right, with my very little music experience, is one that I know of, which is to tell you, listeners who don't know music, like how big that group is.
Oh, it is. It's massive. And we had a conference planned for Prague this coming summer that has been delayed for a year.
Sure.
So the next conference will be in Prague, Czech Republic.
That's pretty cool.
And we hosted it here in 1999.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, because the Performing Arts building, Performing Arts Center, had just been built.
Right.
So I had all kinds of pressure on me to have something of importance take place there. And I said, well, let's have WASB meet there. So when I was president of WASB, I was in Hamamatsu, Japan, and I had a meeting of the board, and the board decided, okay, the 1999 meeting will be in San Luis Obispo, California. So we had bands from all over the world that came and performed in the Performing Arts Center.
That's amazing. And I'm also wondering, when throughout your career, when you're developing all of these many things and you're talking to these people and you're traveling to these very iconic places and you're meeting with very established, reputable, well-known, musicians, were people ever like, what is Cal Poly San Luis Obispo? You're like,
gosh, yes. I had bands that would get off the airplane and get on the buses and go from Los Angeles to San Luis Obispo and look at all the cow pastures.
Yeah.
And they thought that they were going into some horrible, non-musical place. And then, of course, they see our Performing Arts Center, and that's different. Right. See, our Performing Arts Center was designed by a Cal Poly architect. Oh, really? I don't know if you know that or not.
No.
Yeah. I can't remember his name now, but he was he was educated at Cal Poly, and then the acoustician was Kierkegaard, and that was this is just as important as the architect.
Yeah.
To make it sound good, and then the architect gave us several designs, and the design that he gave us that we all jumped on was it's kind of an oval shape, like an opera house, European opera house, except it was big. And so that changed my life, boy, to be able to put the band in there.
Right.
And oh my gosh, that was just like I'd changed jobs.
Right.
And you asked me if I got invitations to go to other places. Yeah, I got lots of them.
That's the other thing too, because for someone who had success in all these different ways, wasn't there ever a moment where you felt like, well, I could go to a place that has a bigger name, or I don't know, whatever. And
worked my way up to Ohio State or Michigan or wherever, Michigan State or Indiana. And all those jobs have opened up and closed. But not once was I ever motivated to do that. Not once.
Because
Cal Poly was it for me. They'd given me so much, and I tried to give them a lot, and so it was a beautiful situation. And then when that Performing Arts Center was built, oh my gosh, changed everything. So that was a wonderful thing. So I've had a what would you call it? I can't think of the word now, but I've had a great professional career, and it's still going on. The very moment my last performance was in the Walt Disney Concert Hall. And then I had to go to Sydney again and do that. And when I came back, I learned Sibelius 6 and started writing music, transcribing and writing and arranging music.
So Sibelius 6 is a software, isn't it?
Yeah, it's software, but it's going to die. So I have to switch to Finale. My son is on my back. So... this is what I'm working on right now. Bizet's Symphony in C.
Wait, and what are you doing with that? Are you transcribing or?
Yes, because this is for orchestra. It's for orchestra. So the whole bottom end of each was string section. So I don't have a string section.
Right.
And I have to compensate for the string section. But I do have saxophones, and I have euphoniums, and I have piano and percussion instruments, and I make up for the lack of string section. It sounds just as good. But yet you have to pick the right piece, though.
Right.
Because if you pick the wrong piece, people go, yuck. Why is it being played by a band? You know, but all the pieces that I've done are just as good as the orchestra, in my opinion.
Looking back on your career, maybe we've covered it already. What was the highest point for you, and perhaps the lowest?
Well, the highest point was establishing WASB.
Mm-hmm.
That was so, and the next highest point would be Carnegie Hall. The concert I was telling you about.
Yep.
And then then the Walt Disney Concert Hall. That was a phenomenal concert. I mean, those are and then the trip to Japan. I mean, you know, the list gets longer and longer.
Yeah.
You know, and so I've led a charmed life as a band director, because there was enough freedom there for me to take a group to Vienna, and my students. They said, okay, we're going to Vienna. None of us ever been to Europe, and I'd never been to Europe. So we're going to spend 2 or 3 days in Paris. So we landed in Paris, and we spent 2 or 3 days in Paris, and then we got on buses, and then we went to Strasbourg,
mm-hmm.
and then to Salzburg, and then on to Vienna. So that was scary. I'll tell you. The guy who was the head of the department had already retired, and he went to the president and told him that I shouldn't be taking the band to Vienna, because I didn't know what I was doing. I was too young. And so the president of the university called me into his office. His name was Robert Kennedy. Remember the library, Kennedy Library?
Yeah.
They named it after him.
Oh.
He was the president of Cal Poly, and he was tough as nails. But I was prepared, and he wanted to know in detail what we were going to do. And the time I finished, he said, "Okay, you can go. Not only that, I'll help you raise the funds to go." And he did. So that was the kind of the beginning of everything, of being able to go to Vienna and participate in the International Youth and Music Festival. That opened my eyes to a lot of things, you know. And then the lady that was running that invited me to Israel in just a minute, I'll tell you, 1993. And I became the conductor of the Israeli National Youth Wind Orchestra. And so I had, all my kids were Israelis. And you know what happened? War broke out while I was there.
Wow.
The Hezbollah in Lebanon was sending rockets over into Israel. And I figured, well, you know, that'll be the end of this program. And I had one piece that I was doing is called "To Tame the Perilous Skies." And I thought, boy, if we could play that. But then I figured the whole thing would be over. So I get to rehearsal the next morning after hearing helicopters and airplanes flying over. And the students gathered around me. They called me Beale. Beale, are you afraid? And I said, no, I'm not afraid. The Israeli military is very strong. Well, these rockets that are coming in are Katyusha rockets, and they went into great detail to explain them. And they said, okay, the Katyusha rockets we are out of range, so we have rehearsal. Can you imagine that? Imagine going to the Cal Poly band and Santa Barbara is being bombed.
Yeah.
And we're going to have rehearsal.
Yeah.
And that's the way, that's a way of life for those kids.
Oh.
So, and toward the end of I was there for about 3 weeks. Toward the end of the third week, we all got together, and they were shocked that I was not Jewish. And they said, you're not Jewish? I said, no, I'm not. And so from then on, I got Christmas cards from everybody. but I bonded with those kids. They were like my own children. You know, I mean, we had a swimming pool there. We swam together. We ate together, and it was phenomenal. And the Israeli kids, all of them go into the military, men and women. And the men are required to be there for 3 years, and women for 2 years. So I'm in rehearsal, and I look up, and here is the whole back end of the room are full of soldiers with machine guns. Ooh. And you know, and it's like, holy mackerel! So I stop and I said, "Okay, what's going on?" Well, we were in the band last year. We wanted to see what was happening. So you know, they were required, if you go on leave, you stay in uniform and you carry your weapon. Wow. That was in Israel. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that was an incredible experience. And I was a conductor of the New Zealand National Youth Band. So I've done so many things outside of San Luis Obispo that have affected my life. There was absolutely no reason for me to be looking at another place. Yeah. You know, San Luis Obispo was a great place to be because I had incredible students. I didn't have any music majors until the late 90s. Wow. So I went from 1966 to 1992 with no music majors. And even now, the top group is absolutely full of non-majors. Right. You know, and it's guys like you and Steve James and all these other architect, engineering, computer science people. You remember Len Kawamoto? Yeah, Len. Len was a computer science major. No kidding. And he was one of my top French horn players. And he graduated and became the assistant director of the marching band. That marching band wouldn't work without him. Yeah. I remember Len. Yeah, Len was incredible, but he was my student for 4 years. So then let me ask, what was either the lowest point in your career or maybe the most difficult thing that you had to overcome? Yeah, that. There weren't very many low points. I think when I had an arrangement with the university to go to a conference, and that was all travel was frozen. I remember that. I was so disappointed. I didn't get to go on that. So. But I'll tell you, those students have never disappointed me. I've never once I've been. I get angry at sometimes, like Art Gaffrey, you know, the assistant drum major, and haul him into the office and have him write 10 things down to be successful. And the sad part is that I don't know what they are. I'm gonna reach out to him and I'm gonna ask him for what those are. Gosh, it would be in a tattered piece of paper in his billfold. Yeah. Now, the one thing I used to always say to the band at our first meeting: look around the room. There's a strong possibility that your future husband or wife are sitting here. And I'd have students tell me that's the most ridiculous thing they ever heard. But then, of course, all kinds of weddings take place. In fact, I was asked by Michelle Hall, no, Michelle, can't remember her last name now, and Anthony Hall, if I would marry them. So I officiated their wedding.
No kidding.
Yes.
But I think those names sound really familiar. I think they might have overlapped with me. I don't know. Perhaps not.
Oh, I don't know. The thing that's tough for me is to remember when somebody was in the band.
Oh, after 44 years,
horrible time with that. And if they're in the band at a certain time, then they need to know who this person is. But then I'll be talking about this person, and they have no idea who that is because they weren't in the band then.
I think that's perfectly okay considering the illustrious and long career that you've had. Those of us who are teaching now that have not taught for so long don't really have an excuse quite yet. I did want to zoom in and ask a couple specific questions.
Sure.
Which was, going back to the idea of being a conductor, what is the most difficult thing, the difficult part about being a conductor, or what is the most common reason why younger conductors don't do as well as they could be doing?
Most of it is learning the score. And I can always tell when somebody doesn't know the score because they're standing there staring at it, conducting and looking at the score. Right. And you should be looking at the musicians. I was asked to conduct the United States Marine Band one time, or a couple of times. And I'm standing up there and not one person is looking at music. They're all staring me in the face. Boy, I'll tell you, that if you don't know the score, you're in big trouble. They're looking at you and you're looking down at them and looking down at the score. So you've got to know the score inside and out. And if a wind comes along and blows the thing away, then you keep going. It's only there for a reference.
Right.
There are a lot of people like David Whitwell. He doesn't use scores at all. He doesn't even have a music stand in front of him. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges of being a conductor is knowing the score.
Interesting.
The second challenge is knowing your musicians.
Mm-hmm.
You got to know them extremely well. And because if you don't, you're going to be saying things and doing things that are inappropriate.
Right. You have to be in tune with them, I guess.
You have to be in tune with them. That's exactly right. But the biggest challenge is knowing the score.
Mm-hmm.
And then you got to be faithful to the composer.
That's a really interesting idea, and it's something that you had, I think I remember reading that at some point when you do all these things right, the conductor becomes a conduit. That's right.
You're a conduit. You're the thing that holds it all together. You have the musicians and you have the composer, and you're the conduit between the two. And so it behooves you to know the score, and it also behooves you to know the musicians.
Right.
And know what their fears are. You got to know what their goals are. You got to know what makes them the way they are.
It's very interesting. I know we're at the end of the mark here, but if you have a couple minutes, I have just another question.
Yeah, I have all the time in the world.
Okay, cool.
I'm doing what you're supposed to do, and it's shelter in place.
Okay, perfect.
I've been doing that since I came back from Carnegie Hall, March the 12th.
All right. Well, okay. The question is then, so in the moment of leading a group of people, right, and you have to have, as you said, big ears to have a reading of how things are going. When you start to feel like the group. When you start to feel like things aren't going right, and I suppose that could mean a lot of different things, but let's say specifically, well, I don't know, let's say you feel like the music isn't being conveyed right, or the people are getting tired, or something like this. How do you tackle that situation?
Well, you can peak too early. You can pick. First of all, the biggest thing you need to be able to do as a conductor is know the repertoire.
Mm-hmm.
And when you choose the music for that ensemble to play, it should fit them like a glove. It shouldn't be too easy, and it shouldn't be too hard. And it's a progress from the very beginning, the sight reading, all the way to the performance, and you're climbing the ladder. And if you don't have the right piece, then you get to the top, and the concert's not for another 2 or 3 weeks, and that's right. Awful. Or you get to the last rehearsal, and you can't play the piece properly, and that comes from a conductor not knowing the repertoire. And so I've spent a good portion of my life studying the repertoire of wind band, and very often I'll go out and guest conduct, not guest conduct. I go out and adjudicate bands, and here's this high school band director playing some piece that's way over the heads of the students. And so I'll talk to him afterwards, and he would say, well, that was such a great piece. I played it in college. I said, these aren't college students. Right. So, but the reason he played it, because that's the piece he knows. Right. So he learned it in college. Well, you gotta learn the repertoire. If you learn the repertoire, you can pick out music that fits perfectly. That's a really interesting idea, because it says that also there's kind of a life to the ensemble and the process, going from the sight reading, which is the first time you play a piece, to the performance, and that when the piece is not fitted properly, you at some point you're going to reach this point where it as you said, it's either too soon or too late. The sight reading process, if they can't sight read it properly, doesn't mean that they play all the right notes and everything, but you can tell in the sight reading if it's that bad, then don't play the piece, because all you do is frustrate people, and you don't give them you gotta. Here's the thing: you got to make people successful, and if they don't feel successful, then you failed. You haven't provided them an opportunity to be successful. So I think I've always tried to make my students feel like, okay, we did it. We accomplished it. But I don't want them to accomplish it too soon. Otherwise, you're beating a dead horse all the way to the concert. Right. So a lot of it is knowing the repertoire.
Very interesting. The other last question that I have really is, and I don't think I'm trying to if I already asked this question, I don't know. But during your time at Cal Poly, okay, what was the most difficult thing about being the director of bands? And that's a bigger scope than just a conductor, right? Because you're having to lead and organize a bunch of different ensembles.
Well, and in addition to being a teacher, you're also a faculty member, and the faculty members are expected to be on committees and all this kind of stuff. For example, for years I was the chairman of the promotion committee, and that was that was so challenging, and that has nothing to do with my teaching. That just I'm just trying to be a good chairperson of a committee, but there's a frustration of not having the funds that I need, because a lot of instruments I wanted to buy, and I just didn't have the money to buy them. Right. So that was frustrating. But the key there is patience. You say, okay, you can't buy that bass clarinet this year, but maybe next year or 5 years from now you can. And so I look at it as I look everything as long range. If You can't be successful overnight. You gotta step by step by step, and take a lot of little steps, and maybe a big step here and there. But the little steps is what gets you there.
That's the other thing too, is that you have been very successful, and you mentioned patience as being a part of that. But
yeah,
do you have an idea of what else made you successful and achieve all of these things? Because is it the comforting accent that you have, the comforting Southern accent?
Yeah, I guess it's still there, isn't it?
It's a little bit, but it's comforting, so it works.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's interesting you say it's comforting. The Southern accent is designed to be comfortable. It's designed to make everybody feel relaxed around you. Southerners are that way, and that's the way I was brought up. You don't go making people nervous. You want to make them happy and make them successful. That goes with all kinds of my interaction with people when I was growing up. But there was also a discipline. My father was an incredible disciplinarian, and I appreciate that. Thank goodness for my mother, because she kind of balanced it out a little bit. But my father was I got hired to take tickets at the door. I was going by the clock on the stove at home, and the electricity had gone off, so the clock was wrong. So I showed up late, and my dad said, "You're fired."
Lesson learned.
Lesson learned, man. But when I got to Michigan, having to deal with Ravelli, that was a piece of cake, because my dad was worse than him.
I think speaking to you today was really interesting. It was a pleasure for both of us. And so is there anything else you want to share?
No, I just want to say how honored I am to be asked to do this.
Thank you to Jay for coming on the show, and thank you guys for listening to this podcast. It really means a lot to us. If you like what we're doing, then please support the show by leaving a review in iTunes. That's a good way to support the show. You can also find us on Spotify and YouTube. And in those places, reviews don't exist, unfortunately, but you can subscribe, leave comments on YouTube, and stuff like that.
We're also on most of the social media, such as Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. We are most often on Instagram, let's just be honest. You can send us DMs, leave us some comments, share in our stories or new episodes coming out. We also have a hotline where you can call or text any questions, guest suggestions, any stories you want to share, any feedbacks you want to give us. The number is 213-222-6950. What else?
That's it. That's a lot of stuff. Yeah.
More cool guests coming your way, more topics, more content. Just stay tuned.
Thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you again next week or sooner. Bye.